So hello there and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast, the show where we talk all of the latest news, gossip and events in the world of Formula 1, and we relay that back to you for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending of course on which platform you choose to follow us on. And guys, I just want to wish you all a happy Valentine's period wherever you are around the world, if you are celebrating it of course. And whilst love is very much in the air, one love that we can all agree and share is our passion for Formula 1, and F1 very much seems like it's on the horizon, that it's coming back to us very, very soon, and the launch of the new cars are already taking place. And in this episode, we are going to be discussing the first 5 launches that we have seen so far, including one key area of weakness that we feel each team at least needs to address to have a better 2022. And those teams, of course, are Haas, Red Bull, Aston Martin, McLaren and Alfa Tauri. We will of course be doing the remaining 5 teams in Williams, Ferrari, Mercedes, Alpine and Alfa Romeo in a part 2 episode next week. And of course we're going to be discussing a few little news snippets that we have been seeing doing the rounds this week as well. Joining me on this episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast is my co-host Lee Wallington joining us. Lee, first of all, how are you doing, and how was your Valentine's period? Did you get up to much with the missus? Did you have a good time?
Well, first off, yeah, I'm good, thank you. I do hope you're good as well. And yeah, the Valentine's period, a nice bit of fun. Going out to eat somewhere nice and enjoyed our day, really. Unfortunately, still had to work, but yeah, what can you do?
Yeah, it's always the way, isn't it? But then, I don't know, sometimes a Valentine's Day evening meal with the other half isn't a bad idea during the week. I think on a weekend, it just comes absolutely hectic, and it's trying to book this or book that. It's just an absolute nightmare. But it was nice. Went to a nice tapas place in Brixton. So yeah, very, very nice indeed. Yeah, but let's get on with this episode. And I think the first thing I wanted to talk about was the news earlier this week where the FIA had their meeting with the World's Motorsport Council, including heads from some of the leading F1 teams, most notably Christian Horner at Red Bull and Toto Wolff at Mercedes, that we saw on the pictures on Sky Sports and on social media as well, making their way to the London headquarters with the FIA president, Mohammed bin Sulayem. And I guess we, as fans, we were kind of hoping that we might be able to hear a formal update in terms of their findings of this investigation into the aftermath of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and obviously what went down in those crucial 4 or 5 laps, which led to the controversy that we all saw around the world, resulting in Lewis Hamilton effectively being robbed of a record 8th world title in favour of Max Verstappen, who was able to capitalise on the situation and win his first Drivers' Championship. Now, at the centre of this controversy, Lee, we've been going on and on and on about the role of Michael Massey as the race director. Was it still a tenable position for him? What did the future look like for the FIA in terms of the structure of the Grand Prix rules as they exist in Formula 1? Are they still fit for purpose? And I think a lot of people probably agreed from this fallout that they perhaps weren't fit for purpose, or weren't written in a way that was clear and concise for fans to fully understand and agree. Not that the FIA did themselves any favours in making that point quite apparently clear, unfortunately. PR is PR, but there's always a way to go about it. Unfortunately, it seems from the conclusion of this meeting that we didn't get a formal press release from the FIA in terms of an outline into what their investigation had brought up so far, and also the updated structure changes that we were hoping for. As much as we got was from Mohammed bin Sulayem himself, was basically saying that he would publicly present the news of the structural changes and action plan in the coming days. But overall, he said it was a good meeting and that they went through a lot of important things for the season ahead. And as he said, he just said it's still ongoing. He said discussions were good. Now, on the surface, that sounds okay, I suppose, taking it for what it is. But myself and a lot of F1 fans, Lee, I was quite disappointed that we've kind of been at this now for the best part of a month and a half, I think is probably fair to say. I don't expect much to have been done over the Christmas period, but it doesn't seem like we're any closer to getting not necessarily a solution going forward, but also, an understanding as to the FIA's independent, I suppose, review of what happened at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix last season.
No, not at all. It's bureaucracy. They like to take their time to do things by the book and review things and peer review things and make suggestions and have discussions and have meetings. So I'm sure that all went on within the FIA, and that the clogs are slowly moving in action.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. Well, I mean, not me personally, but there is a lot of pressure on the FIA to get this right. And in a way, I'm kind of glad that when we saw Toto Wolff and Christian Horner in particular turn up to the headquarters, at least from what we can gather, they are very much both, well, not so much maybe Christian Horner, but from a Mercedes perspective, they do seem to be quite involved in overseeing this process and make sure that this fact-finding mission is done with the utmost integrity, but also with the aim of trying to preserve the integrity of the sport going forward, which was very much compromised following the outcome of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and obviously how all that controversy transpired. At this point, do you think it's critical that or do you think the FIA are not taking this seriously enough? Do you feel that perhaps this is one of those sort of tactics, as you mentioned earlier, about bureaucracy taking its time, etc., that perhaps they feel that they're still underestimating the significance of making sure that whatever future changes that are being proposed following the aftermath of this report are making sure that the integrity of the sport is at the centre of it?
Before I go into that, I do want to say that in the previous episode, I did mention that I don't expect any outcome just based on the FIA's previous actions in other not obviously similar because it's never happened before, but in other FIA involved mistakes or things like that in the past, that it's come to nothing. So I think it's too early to say that if they're not taking it seriously or not. Obviously, if there's discussions going ahead and Toto to come out happy with how discussions have gone, he would be incensed if it's gone nowhere and there's no developments. So the FIA have to be taking it seriously to a degree, because there seems to be an agreement between Christian and Toto that they were obviously good discussions, and that both sides feel like they've gained something, or obviously not gained an advantage to the teams, but it's been a progressive talks, which has been obviously the main thing. So on the face of it, especially the new FIA president, it looks like Mohammed is taking it seriously. I mean, other presidents in the past may not have done. I'm going to refer to obviously the Max Mosley, Bernie Ecclestone period. If last year happened under their reign, I don't expect anything to have happened. But yeah, new management has come in effectively, and Mohammed, being an ex-race driver himself, not afraid to shake the boat to get things fair and bring the sport back into what the fans want. So let's wait and see what we actually hear as official outcome from the investigation is my feelings behind it.
Yeah, it's important to mention in this context, I suppose, in a way, the opinion of former FIA presidents like Max Mosley and particularly Bernie Ecclestone, not to put words in their mouth. No, and this is not me saying that this is what they would say, but I wouldn't be surprised if they'd taken the more harder or colder approach and saying, well, they lost, that's it, move on, and no more, and just get on with it. And the backlash, I suppose, from the fan base has probably never been greater, owing to the rise in social media and the exposure to so much fan opinion that just didn't exist back when they were at the helm at Formula One and at the FIA. And Jean Todt as well. This wouldn't have been one of the ways he would have wanted to see out his time as president of the FIA. And overall, by and large, he did a relatively good job. Very, very intelligent man. I'm sure he would have loved to have been a part of this process for change and to improve the structure of F1 going forward. But I'm pretty confident that he's left it in a man like Mohammed bin Sulayem, who I'm sure his priority is to make sure that whatever happens, the structure of and integrity of Formula One and the FIA can be not necessarily maintained, but improved in the long run. Because I think that's what we all want as fans. I think one thing we should probably address in this regard, Lee, is the resurfacing of certain content on F1, on the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, you know, stuff that had been around for a little while, but for some reason it's resurfaced itself on social media again, and the new hashtags, if you like, that are being introduced on social media, one of which Void Lap 58. I don't know if it's me, but there does seem to be quite a lot of fans, whether they're in the Lewis Hamilton camp or whether they're just neutral in this argument, that are still under the impression that there is a possibility that the FIA, following this report, will decide to potentially void that lap and therefore overturning the result and granting Lewis Hamilton the World Championship. I think probably we, as independent podcasters, might probably do ourselves and some of our listeners a favour that may still be unsure of this, and to briefly explain that situation and where things currently stand with that, because we talked about this before and there's no existing regulation, and I'm going back as far as when Mercedes had recently dropped their appeal to protest the result and what happened at the International Court of Appeal for the FIA. At the time, there is no existing regulation that even if Mercedes were found to have appealed and found that they were right, that the FIA could then change the result to void lap 58 and then grant Lewis Hamilton the World Championship. As far as I'm aware, that situation still exists. You know, so, I mean, what's your thoughts on this? Because, as I said before, I think it's important that whilst I understand and sympathise with fans that feel like Lewis was robbed, and I absolutely agree, I think he was, but we've got, at some point, we've kind of got to accept what's happened and just move past it to a point where, yes, you know, you can still feel bitter about it, but the FIA are not going to change the result. No matter what comes from this report, they are not going to suddenly say, right, we've obviously made a mistake, Michael Massey did this, or he messed up, the rules weren't followed properly, therefore we have to take this action. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I really don't see that happening. As you said, there's no previous precedent, there's no capacity for it in the rules. However, I wouldn't be surprised that one of the things Mercedes have been pushing for is there to be capacity in the rules going forward. Obviously, that won't fix last year, but hopefully a situation like last year in Abu Dhabi doesn't repeat itself. But I'm sure that they would want to make sure that there is a capacity to strip a driver of the championship if there's been a mistake made by the FAA or a foul play by a team or an other unknown situation that we can't think of right now. But I'm sure they'll be asking for that to be added, or have a rule or amendment going forward. We'll have to wait and see if that does get suggested. But I'm sure that's one thing that the Mercedes would have been pushing for. But I firmly believe that Max won't lose his title. Max didn't do anything wrong. He drove superbly throughout the year. It was not his fault that Lewis effectively lost the title for the actions of the FAA. That is not Max's fault. As much as it's you said the video content that came out of the loss of the race, it's still painful to watch. I don't want to go out of my way to rewatch it, but it's not going to change the situation at all.
Yeah, I mean, it was very frustrating. I mean, when I saw it, straight away, I remember, I can't remember who it was, but someone with a big social media account, obviously, because they were able to attract enough attention, they made the point that the implication was that Jonathan Wheatley at Red Bull was giving radio instructions to Michael Massey, which then Michael Massey followed almost immediately, which, in a way, I can understand where the implication comes from. But at the same time, you hear radio messages of instructions or advice given by people like Jonathan Wheatley or at Mercedes or other teams as well, you know, not to name names in particular, but obviously Jonathan's the one that's come up at Red Bull. And you don't hear them on the broadcast. And, you know, Sky Sports, a lot of their pundits were being attacked over this, saying that they didn't mention this during the broadcast, etc. Well, because that's not the feed they were getting. This was from the F1 feed on YouTube. That's a completely different feed altogether. So in real time, they wouldn't have heard half of those messages, specifically that one. But it's not new information. And, you know, if it's found that Michael Massey acted on the advice of what Jonathan Wheatley said to him, then that's on Michael Massey. You know, Jonathan Wheatley is just doing his job at Red Bull. as Toto Wolff was trying to do the same thing for Mercedes when he was saying no safety car when Giovinazzi pulled up, or no safety car for this. It's all the teams do it. I think at the end of the day, as harsh as it is, and I absolutely sympathise, and I really, really do, and I'm sorry to some hardcore Lewis Hamilton fans that might not be happy with what I'm saying here, and it may sound like I'm trying to say, look, just get over it. That's not what I'm saying, but what I am saying is that if you're hoping that the resolution of this is going to result in Lewis Hamilton being awarded the World Championship from last season, then it's at this point, I would say there's no regulation for that to happen. And this is why the big mainstream media outlets or broadcasters are not talking about this at the moment either as a possibility, because there's no existing precedent for it to happen. So I can't see how a scenario would come where the FIA would actually follow and act upon that. So anyway, look, I apologise if we haven't really made that clear, but we've done our best to try and clear that up and move forward. So I think we probably should at this point and talk about something a bit more positive for 2022, Lee. Sprint races. So sprint races, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that the teams were all going to vote on whether or not to have more than 3 sprint races, having 6 sprint races for 2022. And they needed 9 of the 10 teams, I believe, to vote on this. We didn't get that. I don't know how close it was. They never really told us how many, but I just know we didn't get the vote that F1 would have wanted to have extra sprint races. So we're just going to have the 3, and they are going to be at Imola, Austria, and Brazil. They've also changed a few of the formatting elements of the sprint races, one of which is the point scoring positions. Before, we just had points for the top 3 finishers, obviously first getting third, second 2, and third in 1. We are going to have 8 point scoring finishers, descending from 8 points for the winner, 7, 6, all the way down to 8th place, getting 1 in that particular order. And we're also going to get a statistical change where whoever gets pole on Friday will no longer be called the Speed King. Not that anyone really missed that. They will actually be granted with pole position. However, that will only be for the sprint race. They'll still have to win the sprint in order to be starting first in the main race. However, from a statistical perspective, that will be classed as pole position. The winner of the sprint will just start first in the main race. So to sum that all up, Lee, how do you feel about those changes? Because I think I'm happy that they're awarding more points for the sprint. And I also think that it kind of does make sense for whoever's first in qualifying to get pole position. But what are your thoughts on all this, and also the venues that they've gone for next season? Because Brazil's a great choice from what we saw last season, but I'm not sure about Austria and Imola.
I would say also there was one thing that was added. There was no increase to the budget either for the additional races. So the 3 are within the existing budget. I just want to
yeah, that's right. That's a good point to mention, because that was at the centre of the voting stalemate, where some teams, not going to name names because we don't know who, wanted extra allowances to be added to the budget cap to accommodate the extra sprint races, but we didn't get that. So we're just as we were with the current budget cap and the 3 sprint races. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Lee.
That's all right. So yeah, go to answer your question. I know when we discussed it in our Sprint Races Cancelled episode, that one of the things all 3 of us wanted was to have more points, and I think more points will make it a lot more exciting to watch. There's more in it. Obviously, 8 points. All right, there's 3 of them, but that's an additional 24 points. All right, compared to last year, there's 3 points, so there's an additional 15 points now up for grabs if you win the sprint race compared to last year. So there's more incentive to win the race and not just hold second. If you're sitting in second for last year it's 3 points or 2 points. It's 1 point. I know 1 point can make a difference, but 8 points, right, it's still 1 point difference for second place, but it's a lot more incentive. But even for the lower end, the midfield teams, 4 or 5 points is still a nice boost. So it definitely gives more incentive to the drivers and the teams to actually not hold station and push for it, which will hopefully make it a more exciting sprint race. So I'm happy with that. Regarding the qualifying statistic, yeah, that was really nasty. The speaking, what the hell is that about? I mean, we had statistic last year of speakings? No one really cares about that. Moving the pole position to the Friday, it's another good thing. It's obviously makes it a bit anomalous last year about who had pole position, but it's so much better. And it makes it, instead of a sprint qualifying, which what the FIA was in the Formula One was trying to push last year, it's now more of a sprint race and not a sprint qualifying. Although the results obviously do impact the actual Grand Prix starting positions. But I know we've all three of us made it clear we're quite happy with the current Saturday and now the 3-day Friday qualifying format, Q1, Q2, Q3, that works. So it puts more of an end result onto that session, which is another win, which in that sense, I think Formula One has listened to the fans regarding what they wanted a bit more out of the sprint racing. Because obviously there were the common criticisms was the points and the actual who had pole position. Because there's a lot of confusion around that. So I think that's a positive thing that they paid attention. But the venues, I'm not so convinced on that aspect. Obviously, Brazil, we had a treat last year, but that was mainly because Lewis was sent to the back, which made it very exciting. It probably wouldn't be that exciting again this year because that was obviously different. Hopefully, those circumstances wouldn't repeat. But it still would be a good track for plenty of overtaking, and that always is the case. But Austria and Imola, wouldn't be my top choices for a sprint race, especially Austria more than because it's so little corners and there's a lot of straights. It's very, I really don't understand the logic behind those two. I'm not sure what more else I can add to that. I much would have preferred the Silverstone aspect to Monza, like we had last year. But yeah, I do wonder if there have been some teams pushing for particular tracks or not. I don't know. Obviously, that's just guessing. But I'm really surprised by those choice of venues, apart from Brazil, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. Now that I think about it, Austria doesn't sound too bad of an option. Because I'm just thinking mostly about the overtakes that we saw constantly going into turn 4 at the centre of the hard racing controversy that we saw mostly between Norris and Perez and Charles Leclerc as well.
Yeah.
So we might get some action there. Imola seems a rather strange one purely and simply because even if the cars are much better at following each other as we hope they will be this year compared to previous seasons, it's a very narrow circuit. Very old-fashioned one as well. These cars are going to be bigger and it's not going to get any easier to overtake at a track like that. So I guess we have to give it a chance. F1 have made no secret in wanting to make this sprint series a success. They've wanted to extend upon it, perhaps against the best wishes of the fans. I'm still one of those fans that I just don't agree with the concept. I just don't think it adds... Well, I mean, it does add value to the weekend because it's an extra race, it's extra stuff to talk about. I understand that, but... I don't know. I just feel like it's something that's being forced upon us and it's not quite as exciting as an entity as F1 have made it out to be. I think, as you said, Lee, there have been isolated examples as to why some of the sprints have been made to look more exciting than they actually are. Brazil, the prime example. You know, you can celebrate it till the cows come home, but let's be honest, if it wasn't for the fact that Lewis started at the back of the grid with a rocket ship in his car, people wouldn't be going on about that race any more than they would have done about Monza and Silverstone by comparison where we had the other two races. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But I'm glad they've clarified a few things regarding the pole statistic. I think that's probably fair. And also the points. I think you should award more points because I think that way you're going to get more excited sprint races because if you're not fast enough to get into the top 3 half the time, you might as well just stay where you are and protect your car and try and do the proper racing in the main race. So we'll see if that has an effect. Hopefully it does, because there's more to play for now this time. They've also made some changes with the FIA. The FIA have made changes regarding the minimum number of laps required to, be completed to actually score points. And this was following the controversy of the Belgian Grand Prix earlier this season, where we didn't actually have the minimum number of laps required to complete a race. And then we ended up having a race that according to the FIA and F1 was completed, I don't think the Belgian fans have still been given any sort of reimbursement for that, which is an absolute travesty. So, yeah, if anyone knows, do let us know if there is an update on that. But as far as I'm aware, I haven't heard anything yet on that one. It seems to have been forgotten about almost, which is a shame. But they've made changes. And Lee, as you pointed out to me before we actually went on air, it's no points are going to be awarded unless we get 2 completed laps of the race with no safety car intervention whatsoever. So we have to have 2 actual green flag laps of racing to score points, by which there's only 25% of points on offer up until the point where they've completed 25% of the race. And then, of course, the next threshold is 25 to 50% of the race distance, where you get half points, and then 50 to 75% to get, I think, 3/4 points. And then after 75, you get 4 points. So it's on the FIA's website if you want to have a look and how the new point system will be for those thresholds. But I suppose it's another one of those boxes you can tick off to say, yeah, lessons learned from 2021. Not the biggest issue, but, you know, something that was a bit of a problem, and at least they've addressed that, which is good news.
Oh yeah, completely agree. It's we just imagine what Spa would have been like if we had 2 green laps in that wet. Or yeah, that would have been tasty 2 laps. I much prefer to watch those 2 laps than the safety car go round.
Well, it literally would have been pure survival, wouldn't it? I mean, who knows? Yeah. George Russell may have won the Grand Prix. We don't know.
Exactly.
And yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. If we get into a situation like that again, it's good to know that we'll be armed and aware of what is required in order for a race to be classified as a race, rather than what we saw last season. Let's move on, of course, to the main point of this episode, Lee. We've been recording for nearly 20 minutes now, so we probably should get on with it. I'm sure our followers would appreciate it. But this is a launch F1 special. I was going to say launch livery purely because some of the teams have just put out a new livery on a show car. Red Bull and Haas, I'm looking at you. But, you know, all jokes aside, we've got new cars coming out. It's exciting. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing these new cars out on track, which we won't do for a couple of weeks yet because we're not going to see the first test in Barcelona, but we will do in Bahrain, hopefully. And I want to start with Haas, if I may. Now, Lee, I'm unpopular opinion as it may sound, and I know it kind of goes against the core demographic that Haas was aimed at when it was introduced in Formula One, given its heritage and its background. But I didn't mind the Haas livery too much. I know there's the Russian undertones with the Uralkali sponsor and the connection with Mazepin, but I didn't mind seeing that on the car. I suppose the reason why a lot of people didn't like it was because it's basically an American team name branding a Russian flag. So all the political reasons that come into that and the connotations that come from that obviously will either deter or, you know, make you hinder or improve your perspective on how the car looks. This year they've gone for something very, very similar in terms of a livery design. Probably because I've seen so much of it last year, I'm not really too fussed about it either. But it was the first opportunity to see a brand new 2022 car, albeit a computerized rendered version of one. What did you think of the new Haas? Did you like it? Did you think it's a good looking livery to have on a new 2022 car?
I mean, as a livery, I much prefer the current white and the Russian flag theme, as you said, or the red, white, and blue theme, because obviously, as you said, it's an American team. The US flag has red, white, and blue, so that does work as well. But it's much better than the grey cars that Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen used to drive. There's a very dull car now, so obviously last year it had this, as you said, similar livery. It's a much more lighter car, and it does bring lighter tones to the grid. So I'm quite happy with predominantly white car with obviously the red and blue markings. So the colour scheme I'm quite happy with. But I was surprised at how tight the rear of the car looks when you compare it to some of the other cars that we've seen. Which is intriguing because obviously it does. Obviously, teams love to try and make that rear of the car as narrow and tight as possible, and either they're hiding something, or damn, that car is going to be fast if they've got their aerodynamics right.
Yeah,
because it just looks so tight that some of the other teams that we're going to discuss in this episode haven't got it that tight. Admittedly, they could be completely fake because it's computer render and the actual car is as wide as a bus at the back, which I doubt. But I was really surprised at that feature.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting with the Haas because I think there was more intrigue looking at this car to try and see what secrets we might learn about how the Ferrari is going to look, which of course we will see at the point of recording this. We'll see in a few days' time, and we'll talk about that in next week's episode. But we didn't really get a lot from this. There's been a lot of rumours regarding the new Ferrari that it's going to have a pull rod suspension, contrary to the push rod one, which is usually the norm. And I think we were hoping to see something like that on the Haas, but at the front of the car, they've gone with a push rod suspension, and I personally feel that this is a bit of a bluff, because one of the elements on the push rod suspension on the computerized render of the Haas is not connected to the chassis properly.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's been put there to try and deceive us into thinking that the Haas is going to be push rod, and that to hide the fact that the Ferrari is actually going to be a pull rod. So I wouldn't be surprised if both of them end up being the pull rod. Now, let's not forget that whilst Haas and Ferrari can't work together on their cars, we have to stress, that there is practically, if you like, an imaginary fence between the two teams at the Maranello base, which of course Haas have a technical workshop there for their car and for their team that is headed up by Simone Resta, and a lot of people seconded over from Ferrari as a result of the budget cap, would have had to find or redeploy them elsewhere. Haas are pretty much building their car from scratch. There are spec parts they can take from Ferrari, but the design is by and large their own. And, minor stuff like the gearbox and the engine, and obviously stuff they'll have to design to their car to accommodate that, which Ferrari can, of course, advise them on because they are the engine suppliers. That's pretty much the only similar hallmark they were expected to see between the two teams. That said, there are going to be elements about this car that may reveal certain secrets about Ferrari, so it's understandably, as you mentioned, why Haas on this computerized rendered version of their 2022 car, where they may be trying to keep their cars close to their chest. But as you said, it's a very tight, neat package. I guess in a way that kind of gives us hints as to how tightly compact this new Ferrari engine and gearbox is going to be. Of course, the big issue with that is it going to be reliable? Is it going to be susceptible to heating issues and lack of cooling? Because if it is, it's going to cause a lot of problems for Ferrari and its customers because of the engine freeze for the next few years. So they have to make sure it's reliable. So overall, it looks very clean and elegant to a degree. It's practically a show car, but a Haas's version of a show car, if you like. And yeah, I suppose we'll just have to look forward to seeing how it's going to look out on track and testing and what other pieces that we're expecting from them.
Oh yeah, definitely looking forward to that aspect of seeing what that car actually can deliver and see if it can get Haas off the back of the grid.
Yeah, and it's a big year for them in that regard because of what they've had to sacrifice to get to this point, pretty much throwing away 2021 to make this possible. And an ongoing theme with this episode that I'm going to ask you, Lee, is if we can pinpoint one particular weakness in each team that needs to be improved to have a better 2022, what that would be. So I'm going to start you off with Haas in that regard. If there is one weakness that Haas needs to address, what do you think that would be?
Apart from being a faster car.
Well, yeah, we could say it could be more aerodynamically sound compared to these previous years, but then that's kind of a given for every team. But what other one would you feel that needs to be addressed for them?
For them, I would say it's more of a operational thing of how they manage the car and development throughout the season. You have other teams on the grid that are relentless with their development. But that's not something that Haas has shown in the past, that it's relentless or even mediocre. It generally doesn't do much of a development. They put the car, they make sure it works, and then they already move on to next year, which it does help if you especially have a big rule change like we've had. But you can carry over parts. So I would expect, as the rules are going to be stable for the next few years, that Haas should really focus on the development rate for their car.
Yeah, it's a good point. I can agree with that one. I think they have to improve their development capacity of this car.
Yeah.
It has to justify writing off 2021 for a start. That they pretty much spent the year with a car that they couldn't really add any parts to. Pretty much the homologated pieces that they weren't able to add in 2020 went onto the 2021 car, and that was it. And they had two young drivers in Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin that pretty much had to drive from a base car for the whole season. and learn their way. And it's going to be critical for Haas to try and see if they can break into that midfield, or at the very least be much more competitive relative to where they were last season. So, there's a lot riding on this for them. I hope for their sake that the development capacity is going to be good, because they're going to have to produce a car that's going to have to improve throughout the year. I think that's just going to have to be something for everybody, but for Haas in particular, that's going to be critical, because in the years gone by, Haas have always had a tendency to start relatively well, but then slowly fade down the pecking order because of the lack of development capacity in their previous cars. So with the personnel that they have this year, seconded over from Ferrari, like Simone Resta, the new technical director there, it's going to be critical that they can create something that they can develop and work on, because I think for all the teams in 2022, even if they're not at the front in 2022, given what we've been hearing, the pecking order should close up, or there should be a lot less of a variance in performance, or it should be a tighter pecking order, if you like, less of a range in performance. That's going to come in years to come.
I was going to say, also, you think of a big rule change that we're going through, the rate of development throughout the year, as the teams understand the performance of the car. I mean, there'll be some massive gains this year compared to how the cars will be in a few years' time. They won't have that same rate of gains. So development is a key thing for this year.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think for Haas, that's going to be more important than most teams. So we'll have to see what they do. And hopefully, of course, their drivers can improve in line with that. So let's see how they get on. Next, we've got the defending drivers' champions car, Max Verstappen, the Red Bull RB18. Now, just a quick footnote for those of you that will be very eagle-eyed and asking, well, why is this not called the Red Bull RB17? Purely and simply because normally Red Bull operate by the number car that they have that since they've existed into the sport. So the first one was the RB1. This would be their 18th season, so the RB18. Last season, because of the rules being homologated from 2020 to 2021, they effectively called their car the RB16B rather than a brand new RB17. So that's kind of the logic for it. So there won't be any RB17, unfortunately, the fabled missing Red Bull, if you like. But I think a lot of us were kind of hoping that Red Bull wouldn't do what they did. Unfortunately, they ended up doing it anyway, and that is a livery launch, or a sponsor launch, if you like, rather than an actual brand new car. Red Bull, during their launch, were advertising it as a brand new car, but effectively what they did was roll out a show car, paint it in the new Red Bull livery, and basically promote their new title sponsors, Oracle, which they've signed a 5-year deal worth up to $500 million in sponsorship. So a huge amount of money, but a little bit disappointing that we didn't really get to see a proper Red Bull car at this point in time. What are your thoughts on it, Lee?
Yeah, obviously I wasn't expecting Red Bull to make things obvious regarding the development of the car and go, obviously provide a presentation and go, this is what we're working on. No, I don't expect anything like that. But yeah, the show car is a bit disappointing. Obviously, Red Bull fans really want to see the car and what they've obviously their Genius Age News been up to, what's gone on it, and obviously now we have to wait a bit more to see what actually does come on. Obviously, as you said, we don't see the first test, so it's going to be even more waiting. But yeah, I wasn't surprised, but yeah, just to call it what it is and call it a livery launch and not just a look at a new car. That's the only slightly annoying thing for me. But yeah, there's not really much else to add to that.
Well, no, it's clever marketing from Red Bull. A little bit cynical, and I wasn't really happy about it, but then I wasn't surprised that they were going to do that. I wasn't expecting them to show their car. But they allowed a lot of people on their streams to, sort of co-host the launch, if you like, to put it on their streams and that. So there was plenty of exposure. Very, very clever stuff from Red Bull. But as soon as they were showing the car, and I thought, yeah, that's not a Red Bull. Not at all. On a side note, I suppose it is quite refreshing to see the number one back on the Formula One grid again. Now, in recent years, other than I think a one-off occasion a few years ago at Abu Dhabi, when Lewis Hamilton had it that one time for Mercedes, this would be the first time we've seen a number one on the F1 grid since Sebastian Vettel was the world champion in 2014, running it for that season. So that's always a nice touch, I suppose. And they asked Max Verstappen why he's running number one instead of 33, and he just said, just looks better. And I mean, I kind of agree in a way. Nothing against the number 33, but if I'm the world champion and I have the opportunity to run number 1 on the car, I'm certainly going to enjoy it, because you don't know if it's going to happen again or how long it will be. You know, we can't all be Lewis Hamilton and win world championship after world championship after world championship. So, yeah, it'd be a nice touch to see that on the grid again. With Red Bull, though, speaking...
Yeah, I don't want to add on
sorry,
that, Adam. Sorry.
Get ahead of myself there.
No, it's just obviously if people aren't aware, that is the world champion's prerogative to choose number 1 on their car or have their chosen number. So obviously you want to make that clear if anyone is wondering why that is.
Yeah, very, very true. We often forget that we get a lot of new F1 fans all the time, and yeah, that is the reason. All the drivers are allowed to choose their numbers from the start of their F1 careers, and they have to hold on to that. But the only time they can change their number is if they are world champions, so they have the opportunity to drive number 1, although it's not mandatory, as we've seen from Lewis Hamilton running the number 44 for many years whilst he's been world champion. So, yeah, on the subject of Red Bull, I think it's not easy for us to pinpoint one thing in particular that Red Bull have been very weak at that they probably need to improve on. Is there one in that comes to mind that you think probably should be addressed for them, and perhaps with these new regulations that might be a bit easier for them to address than in previous years?
I mean, operationally, Red Bull is probably one of the best teams you could get on the grid operationally. If they're not the best, they're definitely up there. And obviously, you really can't complain about the quality of the drivers. Yeah, this is probably going to be more of a Courtney's going to be a fan of, but obviously Courtney's not here. I would say not that Red Bull lack their PR, is to be a bit more, not polite because they're not rude. Just trying to express it, not to be so obtrusive in regards in when they're talking into teams or being so antagonistic potentially in a situation. I'm not sure I'm expressing myself properly here, Adam. So please feel free if you think a better way of explaining what. I know Courtney is very anti Christian Horner and how he manages the team, but it's just how that communication, I think, is really needs to be is an area that they could probably improve on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I sort of understand what you mean. I can understand that. I totally get it. I get why. From a British perspective and the British media perspective, I can understand why a lot of what Christian Horner and Dr. Helmut Marko says can be seen as antagonistic and provoking these kind of confrontations, and this how can I put it, the bad blood in this World Championship. I mean, everybody has their role to play.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of also have to accept that it's reported differently around the world. Perhaps we're exposed to more of these tongue-in-cheek statements or these less savoury statements that we hear from the Red Bull camp compared to other countries that may hear the opposite side and may only hear good things about Red Bull, or may only hear that Mercedes are the antagonist or someone else, etc., etc. But I do understand that I think following what happened at the British Grand Prix, particularly last season, I think this is kind of where it mostly sprung into life, if you like, all of this bad blood in this World Championship. For whatever reason, it's up to you guys listening to decide that. But I can understand that perspective. I think for me, looking at Red Bull as a whole, I agree. Operationally wise, they're one of the best outfits out there. They have been for some times, and it's paramount in their success. As it would be for any Formula One team. I think you have to have well-oiled running operations on a day-to-day basis to produce what Red Bull have produced since they've been in Formula One. One thing I do feel that they probably need to improve on is the compliancy of their car. I think in the last season, whilst their car was very, very good, and you could argue was probably the best overall package if you take the engines out of them. But I think one thing that Red Bull struggled to do at certain points last season when they had the issues with the rear wing, particularly on Verstappen's car, where they kept having to change it because they just they were having issues with the speed of it, or the durability of it was an issue, and they keep having to change it, and the DRS flap issues. It is something that they did struggle with last year, and I think Adrian Newey is quite famous for getting these new regulation changes very, very right. He's done it so many times throughout his career, perhaps the exception of 2009, although it did take a bit of time and then eventually it caught up. But, he was absolutely on it, and he may well be on it again this year. But I think what's important for Red Bull to get right is the car's compliancy for both of its drivers. I think with Max Verstappen, we had a driver that is so good at being able to drive the car to its limits, no matter what car he's in. It kind of overshadowed or masked, if you like, certain faults with the car that we only really saw with the number 2 driver. People like Pierre Gasly, Ricciardo to a degree in his latter days at Red Bull, Alex Albon, and Sergio Perez this season. I think it was a great example last season with Sergio Perez that whilst we expected him to have a bit of a difficult period getting used to the car, he was never really at a point where he was driving to the absolute limit that we expected from Sergio, perhaps with the exception of 1 or 2 races like Baku and France. So Red Bull do need to produce a car that both their drivers can get on top of, and hopefully for their sake this season this will present the perfect opportunity, because in my opinion the reason why they lost the Constructors' Championship is because their number 2 driver wasn't doing the job for them that ultimately Valtteri Bottas did for Mercedes as a number 2. That was the difference ultimately. So that, I think if I'm going to look at a weakness for Red Bull that they need to address, that's probably the one where both their drivers can get the most out of the car rather than just Max Verstappen, who can pretty much drive practically anything fast. So I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add on that one.
No, I completely agree with that point. That point makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. Right, so, and guys, as we're going along with this, let us know what you think of the new cars, what's your favourite ones so far, and if there are any inherent weaknesses that you think need to be addressed with each of the teams that we go through. And of course, we will be going through the remaining teams in next week's podcast as well. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but I'll leave a card up here. For those of you that were curious about our 2022 predictions episode and you haven't seen it, I'll leave a card up if you're listening on YouTube. You can check that out. That is live on the channel and on all podcasting platforms as well. So have a look if you're interested to see what we're predicting for 2022. Now let's move on to Aston Martin. And I think it goes without saying, Lee, this is one hell of a beautiful looking car. Last season, the Aston Martin, minus the pink stripe, which I think we kind of got used to over time because of its partnership with BWT. No disrespect to those guys. Of course, it is what, it's their company. They do what they want with it. But I've got to say, now that BWT has moved on with Alpine and Aston Martin are just primarily with Cognizant and Aramco, and they're able to run their own colours, this is absolutely phenomenal how it looks. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see the cars in a reel in one of the screen slots below. And I think you'll agree how good this... I mean, is it fair to say that this is probably the best looking car of the bunch so far, Lee, and perhaps the best looking car that we'll see for 2022?
Oh, so far, yes, I would definitely agree. I think this is the best looking car so far. It just looks really nice from the front and the sides. Maybe not so much from the top. You're looking down on it because it's not flattering at how wide it is compared to the Haas, especially. But just looking at the car, it's just the way the colour and the contour. It's such a good scheme. I love it.
Yeah, I really hope it's fast as well. I think the one disappointing thing with Aston Martin last season in particular was that it was a beautiful car, but it just wasn't quick at most places. So I hope that trend changes. I mean, it's the first proper F1 2022 car that we've seen so far. And I've got to say, there's a lot of optimism in the Aston Martin camp. There's a lot of great people there. Andy Green has spoken very highly of the work that they've been able to do on this car. We should also mention that this is kind of the first car in a few years that, whilst Aston Martin are using a lot of the rear components of the Mercedes, like the power unit, the engine, and the rear suspension, obviously they would do, this is a purely an Aston Martin car. This isn't a concept driven by Mercedes, as they famously copied the W11 from 2019, W10, from 2019 into 2020. And they were found out in 2021 because, of course, the homologation and the rules meant that they were quite limited in what they could do with the car, that they weren't planning to run longer than a year. So it's kind of an all-new change for Aston Martin, their first real proper challenger, the AMR 22. And as I said, if it's as quick as if it's quick, as good as it looks, then it's certainly going to be a very, very good car. I'm quite intrigued by the radiator outlets on the bodywork. Those are quite cool. So those are going to be used primarily to let out a lot of the hot air, help with the cooling. I don't imagine it's going to affect the drag too much, if at all, because otherwise it wouldn't be there. They find another way to sort of use that. So that's kind of a good thing. And I suppose with Mercedes having the cooling issues that they had last year with the engine, it might be it might be something that we see on the Mercedes W13 when that, breaks cover next season. So, Lee, looking at the Aston Martin and how stunning it looks and how quick we hope it will be, is there one particular weakness that you could say that they need to address for this season going forward?
I would have said for them, it's more about the operational side for them. Obviously, as a team, right, it's the different name, different budget now, different management. But in the past, the bulk of the engineers have experience of having a regular update plan. They can bring substantial updates to the car. Obviously, this is the first car that they've actually had a proper good budget compared to the Racing Point days, or even Aston Martin day, where obviously that was a carryover from the Racing Point. So they get the full. Right, obviously, I don't know how much they've spent on the car, but it's a lot more than they probably had in the past. That for sure. But it's more the operational, obviously, to the pit stops, better strategy calls, how they handle the drivers. Obviously, is a key thing. We both made it clear that we want Sebastian to help increase his recovery. Obviously, he's back now after he's come back from Ferrari, so hopefully that's a good sign going forward. Sebastian with a lot of hair again. He's back to his youth. But it's obviously the Stroll aspect with Lance and Lawrence and how they handled that. And if we've got a resurgent Sebastian, it's all down to operational strategy. That's really where I want to see their improvement.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And I agree, absolutely. I think what's going to be key for Aston Martin this season is, can they separate the F1 operations from the business operations, i.e., will they allow someone like Mike Crack, who's the new team principal there, to run the team in the image that he wants to run it without any intervention from Lawrence Stroll, which I don't think what Otmar Zafner really got in that team, and ultimately perhaps why it didn't work out. There was too much of a clash there. Perhaps Martin Whitmarsh, the new CEO, is going to be key in this triage, if you like. You've got, Lawrence Stroll, obviously he wants to be very involved. He's very vocal about the operations. It's going to be so hard for Aston Martin to thrive if he is constantly getting involved in certain situations where perhaps Martin would be better off as a mediator, and you've got Mike Crack trying to run the operations of the Formula One team. Now, Mike Crack, from the testaments of his former colleagues at BMW, he's had so many glowing recommendations from people that he's worked with. They said he's very no-nonsense, straight-talking, not really interested in politics at all, although I'm not sure why he's involved in Formula One if he's not interested in the politics of motorsport. But I digress. He does like to take responsibility for those working under him, those that he does delegate his tasks to. In a way, I suppose it's kind of how you could look at someone like Andreas Seidl at McLaren. I think is a great example to compare to. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Mike to kind of get that right. He's got two drivers at the moment where more needs to be delivered from them this year. More's going to be expected of them. Last year, I think in a way they kind of had a bit of a buffer owing to the fact that the situations with the car. I don't think they're going to get that luxury this season. Sebastian Vettel, by his own admission, was good in parts, but overall made quite a lot of mistakes. But it did seem like he was getting back to some level of performance that he would have been satisfied with. Hopefully, for his sake, his performances improve as much as his hairline has over the last year. I think that's the biggest comeback we've seen so far in Formula One in the last few years. So the great stuff, Seb looks great. Really nice, youthful look. Hopefully we get a bit the younger Seb again. And then, of course, on the other side of the garage, we've got Lance Stroll, who is an okay driver, but I think he needs to prove that he's much more of a solid, reliable, good driver than just 3 or 4 races a season. I think that's got to be the next step forward for him. He needs to be regularly involved rather than just a peak performance every so often. So there's a lot there. I do feel that Aston Martin might struggle with the first thing, to separate the business and the F1 team in that regard, because of Lawrence Stroll's influence on the team and how involved he can be. But if they can get it right, and the car is equally as quick as it and as impressive as it looks, then I think we could see a good year for Aston Martin. I'm still going to hold on to the fact that I feel like that they will be a better team in 2023 and more of a force to be reckoned with. But it certainly looks like a step in the right direction. But we'll just have to wait and see how that sort of transpires on the track, which, of course, they were the first team to do their shakedown at Silverstone, and it looked absolutely phenomenal in real life as it did in the photos as well. So encouraging stuff for Aston Martin. So let's move on to AlphaTauri. Sorry, I'm just flicking through my pages. I've got loads of notes on this. AlphaTauri. I want to do them first, if I may, and we'll do McLaren at the end. The new AT03, which was unveiled today. Was it today, this morning? Oh, no, it was the 14th, sorry.
Yeah, yesterday.
14th, yes. Do apologise. So it was unveiled yesterday. And, it's a nice-looking car. I think I preferred other renditions of the AlphaTauri in previous years' livery, but it still looks good. Solid-looking car. Not a lot to say on this one. I think there's stuff that can be learned about how the real Red Bull RB18 is going to look. We're not really going to dive into that too much, but overall, what do you think of the car, Lee? Do you like it? Does it look good?
I mean, it does look good. But I mean, yeah, I agree. The livery is not probably the best of recent times either. But obviously, you said it may give indicates of Red Bull, but obviously their design is now completely independent. They don't buy the parts from Red Bull like they used to. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm still, as I said in previous episodes, still not convinced by where AlphaTauri may be this year. And for me, out of the five we're discussing, it's probably prettier than the Red Bull, but that's about it. That's just because we haven't seen much of the Red Bull. So yeah, it's not sure what to take away from the car review. Obviously, it's not, for me, it's not as exciting as the Aston Martin. I don't think any of the other cars are exciting as the Aston Martin. But yeah, it's just some more of a wait and see for me on that one.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think we're going to learn more about these cars when we see them, in the flesh, I suppose, a bit more.
Yeah.
As I said, I think the action shots of the AlphaTauri at Imola were quite nice, and it kind of brought the car to life a little bit. There's a lot of good things going for AlphaTauri. The last few years, they've made quite good progress, despite perhaps falling short of the expectations of Fran Tost in recent years. I suppose the one thing I would say about AlphaTauri that they need to address is they probably need to do a better job of maximising its potential. There's been too much underperforming in recent years from them, not just the teams on the car, but the drivers as a collective, I suppose. I think it was Ed Straw from the race who summed it up perfectly when he described them as the underachieving overachievers in that regard. Like, this is a team last season where they were talked about in the same breadth in performance-wise as the likes of Ferrari and McLaren. Now, this is the former Minardi team once upon a time, and Lee, that will struck a chord with you to think that this is the team that, 15 years ago or 20 years ago would be seen as a laughing stock, where Ferrari and McLaren were lapping them for fun like 4 or 5 times a race. And now they're in a position where they are competing with them performance-wise on a regular basis, as they were in 2021 and 2020. But they weren't really able to capitalise that on enough. And, owing to situations where the car had problems with the car reliability, or there were strategy calls that were a bit of a mess, or Gasly breaks the front wing off, or Tsunoda spins it and breaks the gearbox in the back of a wall in qualifying. Despite the fact that AlphaTauri seems to have got a good balance now with what they've done themselves and what Red Bull are providing for them, they need to put that more on they need to get the results that come with that. At times, they arguably had the third fastest car at a few occasions last season, but they ended up finishing behind Alpine in 6th in the Constructors' Championship. It just doesn't add up. So for them, I think they need to maximise the potential that their car is. They've always produced a decent car, and they had a very good one last year. They just need to be able to deliver with it. Where Alpine didn't have as good a car as AlphaTauri had, but they certainly delivered on what they had a lot better than what AlphaTauri did last season.
Oh yeah, completely agree there.
Is there anything you wanted to add on AlphaTauri? Yeah. Perhaps something a bit positive, because I've kind of knocked them down a bit.
Unfortunately, my error would be I completely agree with what you're saying, but for me, it's more about Yuki. It's not positive. It's all about Yuki. There needs to improve. Obviously, he's a driver, but he's still part of the team. It's just Yuki needs to bring up his performances. It's all about Yuki. He needs to bring solid results and not make silly mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think it's a big year for Gasly as well. So hopefully for AlphaTauri's sake, they can make the most of that as well. Because I think there's, Tsunoda does need a better season. Hopefully he does perform better, but we'll just have to wait and see. But he definitely has to cut those mistakes out. And I think AlphaTauri have to manage that situation a bit better as well. Let's move on to the final car, the McLaren MCL 36. And I'm going to be very unpopularly. I think this is probably the worst looking car I've seen so far. I really do not like this livery. I don't know if you're surprised. I know we talked about this, Lee. I mean, before I, dig myself an even bigger hole amongst the McLaren fan base. What do you think of this car? Do you like the livery?
I mean, I do like the livery. I don't think it's as good as the Aston Martin, but I do like it. I know when the car came out, we did speak at the time. I do prefer the darker blue of the last few seasons compared to that light blue. And it's more, I think the theme of this livery is more inspired on the one-off Golf livery we had at Monaco, I believe, last year, which was also a very lovely livery. So they've taken the inspiration and they've reworked it. I'm not a fan of that light blue, but I still like the car and how it looks and the rest of the livery. So yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that one.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I mean, I think there's like 3 or 4 different liveries going on in there, and they've just tried to put them all together to create one super livery. I just feel like there's too much going on. Perhaps it's my taste. I just prefer something a bit more simplistic. But I just feel like there's a lot going on, and none of it's really that great to look at.
You prefer something a bit red?
Yeah, perhaps my biases are showing. I mean, if Ferrari produced a car like that, we'll have to wait and see. It might look better in red. But I was looking at the Indy car, like the McLaren Shadow Indy car that Pato O'Ward's going to be driving. Now that looks really good. Just the orange and the black. I like that. I mean, the duck egg blue is nice. And McLaren have obviously tried to work that in because of how popular it proved to be at Monaco. And that was a beautiful looking car. But I feel like they've just done a bit too much this year. They've tried to incorporate McLaren Shadow, the McLaren heritage with the papaya orange and the duck egg blue into some sort of super livery. It just doesn't work for me. Each to their own, but it just doesn't really work for me, unfortunately. I just hope the car's fast. Doesn't matter how it looks. If it's fast, who cares how it looks?
Yeah, pretty much. I do want to agree on the IndyCar. I know this is a Formula 1 channel, but yeah, I agree that IndyCar looked really nice because obviously they had a multi-car launch just to add that to obviously the people watching. They revealed all their cars at the same time for all their different series. But obviously sponsors are different for different sports series, and obviously sponsors have their own requests on colouring and branding, which obviously and then impacts the colours that they use. But as an event, that was probably the most enjoyable event to watch because just the different cars at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw the Extreme E McLaren car as well. And I think the livery kind of works on the Extreme E car because it kind of goes with the concept of that controlled chaos, I suppose, of Extreme E racing that we saw last year and obviously we'll see in the future. But I just think for Formula One, I don't know, it just doesn't really sit with me from McLaren. But maybe it's because, going through the years, I've seen McLaren take different shapes and forms and this is probably the most radical of those that I've seen in quite some time with McLaren. And some liveries of theirs have worked. Some of them, 2014 in particular, and perhaps 2015 to a degree, the original one, not really a winner for me. And but we'll see. As I said, the FIA have asked teams and F1 have asked teams to have like a testing livery for the first test and then the real livery in the second one. So maybe this is the pre-test livery and maybe we'll see a new one. Maybe that's my thoughts on it, but we'll just have to wait and see, or maybe I'm completely wrong and this is what they're going to be running for this season. We'll see. But McLaren, of course, last few years have been good, have been in the top 4 in the Constructors' Championship the last few years at least. McLaren, for me, I think if there's one particular area that I think that they need to improve on that's considered a bit of a weakness is to try and find a better balance between the high speed and low speed performance of their car. Now, McLaren historically have been operating with a wind tunnel and a simulator where it just isn't where it needs to be in order to compete with the top teams like Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari, of course, now, after their recent upgrades. and it explains why this McLaren is spending a lot of money trying to upgrade it. So they are kind of on the back foot already with this, because we're wary of the infrastructure that's hindering them and affecting them. But what we saw from their car last season in particular is that, and I compare them to Ferrari in this regard, I think it's a good example to have, but what we saw over the course of the season, that Ferrari produced an aero package which was vastly superior to what McLaren had. And McLaren had a vastly superior engine to Ferrari. They had the championship-winning engine in the Mercedes. And as a result, we saw McLaren have such high peaks in performance at certain venues where we saw high speed, like Monza, Austria, for example. Two isolated examples where McLaren were excellent. And of course, where they won, they broke their win drought that was going on for 8 or 9 years at the Italian Grand Prix. But at the lower speed circuits, that's where they really, really struggled to perform. And for me, I think McLaren's biggest task for this season, despite the setbacks that they'll have in what's available to them resource-wise, they need to find a better balance between the high speed and low speed. If they can do that, then there's absolutely every chance that they could be in the upper echelons of the F1 hierarchy for this season. So that's kind of my thoughts on this. I'm not too focused on the drivers too much. I think they both in their own minds do what they've got to do. But to give them the best chance, I think McLaren need to find a better balance in the high speed and low speed corners so that their peaks aren't just, every time they go to a high speed circuit, and that they're better at the lower speed circuits, for example.
Yeah, I completely agree with those comments there, Adam. But for me, I think they need to improve on their wind sensitivity. Last year's McLaren was really susceptible to gusts of wind. So yeah, that's something you don't want a car that is basically a big kite. I know there's a lot of aero and air flowing over the car, but you don't want to be blown around. And they really need to area to improve on is effectively their big fast kite. Don't want that. So that's obviously then at the same time, as you said, is the balance and the weight, but yeah, the sensitivity is the area for me to improve. But I do want to add on with this McLaren is, I believe they've got is it pull rod suspension they have at the front of the car.
Yeah, they've gone pull rod at the front and push rod at the back.
Push rod at the back.
So that'll be interesting. But I mean, it's one of those where I'm kind of reserving judgment and all of that until we start seeing them in testing, because maybe McLaren are being genuine, or maybe they're just pulling the rug from underneath us.
But it's still intriguing because it's against the normal previous years. So it's the first sign of some potential ingenuity we've seen from the teams yet. So I just wanted to highlight that bit. Yeah,
for those of you that aren't sure what we mean by pull and push rod suspension, it's basically the angle in which the suspension sort of connects with the tyres to the chassis of the car, whereas obviously a push one makes it look like the suspension is coming down and pushing the tyres out, and the pull rod is where it's coming sort of down from the top of the tyres down into the chassis like that. So that's kind of a brief understanding of it. But I mean, they obviously have their differences in aerodynamic efficiency depending on how you want to channel the airflow on the cars. But push rod is normally the go-to over the last, for some time actually. I think it was Ferrari in 2014 that went for the pull rod, and then they decided to change it because it wasn't working, because that was a dreadful car by comparison. That was the car that famously Fernando Alonso said had oversteer and understeer at the same time. The F14T. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But, yeah, it's quite interestingly, a lot of teams, McLaren, Haas, not so much Haas at this point in time, we'll have to wait and see. And maybe Ferrari as well might be going pull rod, and maybe Red Bull, I heard. But we'll have to wait and see on that one as well. Is there any final thoughts, Lee, before you want to wrap this episode up? Anything we haven't mentioned already?
No, I'm just I want to add that I'm thoroughly enjoying the cars, and I just can't wait to actually see them on track, because I'm just ready to get stuck into this year's season already.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you, mate. Absolutely agree. I can't wait to see the rest of them and for the season to get underway. But that's pretty much all we have time for the first part of the launch special for F1 2022. We're going to be doing the second half of this next week, where we'll be reviewing the new Williams, which broke cover today, which we'll talk about a bit more detail next week. Apologies for that. And my language there, apologies, slip of the tongue. And we'll talk about the Ferrari, Mercedes, Alpine, and the Alfa Romeo as well. For those of you watching this on YouTube, if you enjoyed the episode, consider giving us a like and subscribe to the channel if you're interested. And if you are listening on your favourite podcasting platform, do also give us a like and follow us. And if you feel we're worthy of a 5-star review, please feel free to give us some. And if not, then let us know what we can do to improve the show. But until next time, guys, thanks for tuning in. We've been DNF1, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. Take care.
Goodbye.